They didn't know I was standing behind the hallway wall. They never looked. Maybe they'd grown used to me, being invisible, quiet, fading, useful, only when convenient. I stood with my hands still damp from rinsing out the lunch dishes, towel in one hand, the other resting lightly on the doorframe, and I heard it, plain as the kitchen light humming above them. "She'll be fine on her own," my daughter-in-law said, casual, like she was confirming a menu choice. My son Marco gave a distracted nod. "Yeah, she's got her little house and her pension. She's tougher than she looks." Tougher than I look. That phrase stuck like a burr. It wasn't even what they said, it was how they said it. No pause, no hesitation, no guilt. I took one step back, slow enough that the wood floor didn't creak, and turned toward the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back. Short, curly silver bob, still damp at the roots, cardigan sleeves pushed up to the elbow, eyes too tired to betray emotion. I tucked the towel over the stair rail and went to my room, closing the door behind me with a quiet click. They'd come over for Sunday lunch. I'd made baked eggplant parmigiana, Marco's favorite since he was 9, even roasted the garlic myself. Anna had barely touched hers, saying she was cutting carbs, then spent most of the meal scrolling through her phone under the table. The kids, my grandkids, didn't come. "Busy," they said. It didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like erosion, like how cliffs don't fall all at once. They crumble silently, grain by grain, until one day there's nothing left. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to recall the last time one of them asked how I was doing. Really asked. Not in passing, not as filler between texts or errands, but with intention. I couldn't remember. The photo on the dresser, Marco, age 5, holding a paper sunflower he'd made in kindergarten, was tilted slightly. I reached out and straightened it. I still remembered the glue smell, the way he beamed as he handed it to me. "She'll be fine on her own." They'd said it like I wasn't a person anymore, like I was a pet they couldn't quite bring themselves to abandon, but didn't want to bring inside either. After they left, I didn't cry. I made tea, instead. My small rituals were the only constants now. Boil the kettle. 2 spoonfuls of loose chamomile. Ceramic mug, with the faded blue stripe. I stirred and stared out the window above the sink. The neighbor's boy was helping his mother plant tulip bulbs. She laughed as he dumped a handful of dirt on her shoe. I smiled, then looked away. Smiles don't always reach the places they should. At 74, I thought I'd be wiser about things like this. I thought I wouldn't care so much what people thought of me, or how often they visited, or if my calls were returned with one-word texts. But the truth is, motherhood doesn't shut off, even when they've forgotten the sound of your laugh. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt colder than usual, though the thermostat blinked 72. I pulled the quilt higher and closed my eyes, but the silence buzzed louder than any clock. In the darkness, their words returned. "She'll be fine on her own." Maybe I would be, but not because they said it, because I'd decide to be. I got out of bed and went to the hallway closet. The top shelf held a dusty red box I hadn't opened in years. Inside, notebooks, old recipes, dried eucalyptus from my wedding bouquet, and a folder, thick with documents I didn't even need to read to know what they were. Bank statements, deed papers, retirement disclosures, everything that said I had value, just not the kind they could see. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I brewed strong coffee, made toast with marmalade, and sat with a red folder at the table. I didn't read anything yet. I just looked at it. Like a sleeping animal I wasn't ready to disturb. Marco texted mid-morning. "Thanks for lunch yesterday. Food was good as always. Hope you're feeling okay." I replied with a thumbs up. Nothing more. He didn't notice the silence beneath it. That afternoon, I called the contractor who'd helped fix my fence 3 years ago. "Nice man, Sicilian. Always brought his own broom," he answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Romano, it's been a while. How can I help you?" "I want to restore something," I said. "Something that used to matter." He didn't ask questions. Just said, "You tell me when and where." I told him I'd call again in a few days. Then I hung up and stared at the wall. Not out of confusion, but clarity. They didn't just underestimate me. They forgot who I used to be. I was 16 the first time I worked a double shift. My father had slipped on wet concrete outside our butcher shop, and Mama had cried so hard the neighbors brought her sugar water. The following morning, I tied my apron over my school dress and opened the store myself. It smelled of lemon soap and metal. I remember wiping the counter and thinking, this is what strong looks like. That feeling never really left me. I married young, just 19. Stefano Romano was a mechanic with quick hands and slow promises. But he loved me in the quiet ways that mattered: hot meals, refilled gas tanks, a hand always at the small of my back when we crossed streets. He passed when I was 42, a heart attack that waited until a Sunday morning and stole the sound of laughter from our house for years. Marco was 15 then. I still remember the way he curled into the corner of the couch, arms crossed, refusing to cry. I didn't push him. I just made sure the light stayed on and dinner was hot every night. That's what mothers do. We hold the roof up while pretending the walls aren't falling in. I sold Stefano's old Fiat, pawned a gold bracelet my mother left me, and found work as a receptionist at a small dental clinic across town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough. By year 2, I was managing the front desk and sanitizing tools after hours. My hands were cracked and red by winter, but Marco never missed a field trip or went hungry. That was the deal I made with myself. His world would never reflect mine. I kept a folder for every milestone: his high school diploma, his first job offer, his wedding invitation, the ultrasound printout of my first grandchild. They're all still in the drawer next to my bed, labeled with my handwriting, slightly slanted to the right, proof that I was always here, even when no one noticed. When Anna came into the picture, I tried. I really did. I made her biscotti from scratch when she said she missed the ones her grandmother used to bake. I taught her how to roll gnocchi, even though she laughed halfway through and said, "We'll just order takeout next time." I smiled. I always smiled. But over the years, the small invitations stopped. One Christmas, they told me not to bring anything, and when I arrived, my casserole sat untouched in the corner of the buffet. Another year, they gave me a digital photo frame for my birthday. I never figured out how to load photos onto it. No one offered to show me. After that, I stopped bringing gifts, unless I was asked. I stopped asking questions that went unanswered. Silence taught me to become efficient, quiet, helpful, disposable. Still, I never stopped being a mother. Even now, as I sit here with my hands wrapped around a coffee mug, I remember the weight of Marco in my arms: 6 pounds, 3 ounces, and always warm. I remember the fever nights, the spelling tests, the way he used to run toward me after school with dirt on his cheeks and a wide, toothy grin. That little boy would have cried if someone said, "She'll be fine on her own." He would have run back into the room and said, "Not my mama." But people grow, and sometimes when they grow, they forget where they came from. I went to the closet again that afternoon. Not for the red folder, but for the wooden crate behind it, the one I hadn't opened since I moved into this smaller place 10 years ago. Inside were my cafe journals, recipes, notes, ideas scribbled on napkins and receipt paper. Back in the 80s, after Stefano passed, I'd tried opening a little coffee corner downtown. Just a few tables, some espresso, and pastries in the morning. I called it Dolce Vita, even though life wasn't all that sweet then. It only lasted 3 years. The rent got too high, and Marco needed braces, so I let the dream go without bitterness. I always told myself, there will be time. But now time was all I had. The pages smelled like cinnamon and flour. There were notes on customer preferences. Mr. DeMarco liked 2 sugars, always. Teresa, from the pharmacy, hated almond. My cursive handwriting was shaky in places, firm in others, like I was arguing with myself across the decades. I flipped through the pages slowly, my thumb trailing across the margins. And then I saw it. An old sketch of the cafe layout, drawn in pencil with measurements scribbled along the edge. I'd forgotten I'd even done it. But it was still there. Proof that I once imagined more than just surviving, that I'd once dreamed of a life that included me, not just as a helper, not just as support, but as the main character. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the kitchen table, pages spread out, making a new list on clean paper. A grocery list? No. A plan. Not for them, for me. If I ever had a say in how I'd spend my last chapter, it would start right here, with flour on my hands and something in the oven that didn't come from grief. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about being erased. You don't notice it until your outline fades, until your name gets softer in their mouths, until your chair at the table starts to feel optional. I started keeping notes. Not because I was bitter, but because writing things down gave them shape. And if I could see it in ink, I couldn't pretend it was just my imagination. March 18, Marco said he'd call Tuesday. It's Friday. March 22, I asked Anna if I could stop by with some biscotti. She said, better not. We're trying to keep the house gluten-free for now. April 4, texted about the twins' recital. She replied with a smiley face. I never got the date. It went on like that. A collection of non-events, a pattern stitched from silence and short answers. A few times I wondered if I was being too sensitive, if maybe this was just how people communicated these days, terse, functional, filtered through emojis. But no, I wasn't new to this world. I'd spent years learning when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to listen with my whole body. This wasn't modern life. This was neglect, carefully packaged in politeness. The worst of it wasn't cruelty. It was absence. There's a kind of loneliness you feel even when the house isn't empty. The kind where the phone rings and your heart leaps, only to find it's a robocall offering you an upgraded energy plan. One afternoon, I called Marco just to hear his voice. When he picked up, I could hear the engine running in the background. Hey Mom, can I call you right back? I said. Sure. He never did. I didn't mention it when he texted the next day, with a link to a funny video. I just typed LOL and moved on. I hadn't seen my grandkids in 6 weeks. 6. I knew because I marked it in my calendar. That wasn't normal. Not for a grandmother who used to babysit them during summer vacations, who helped change diapers when Anna had migraines, who made paper dolls and dinosaur cookies by hand. But now I was a faded photograph on their hallway wall. I stopped offering. That's how the detachment hardens. First they forget to ask, then you forget to offer, and soon enough, everyone pretends they meant well. I started walking more. Around the neighborhood, then around the park, near the library. It helped my knees, and it helped the silence feel less like punishment. One morning, I passed by a little storefront on Pine Street. The sign above the window read, "Closed for renovation," but through the dusty glass, I could see the bones of something familiar, peeling tile floors, rusted counters, a faded chalkboard menu still nailed to the wall. It had once been a coffee shop, back when I used to sneak in for cannoli after grocery runs. I stood there longer than I meant to. Palms pressed to the cool glass, I pictured what it could be, what it might become again. That evening, I pulled out my old cafe journals and opened to a page dated 1992. The handwriting was sharp and fast, steaming milk instructions, price margins for espresso beans, scribbled calculations in the corners. I flipped to the next blank page. Then I wrote a list. Floors, tile or wood? Counter height? Reachable with arthritis? Seating 4 tables, 3 chairs each. Name? Something that feels like home. My hands didn't shake, not from doubt, but from memory. I called the contractor the next morning. Vittorio, I said, remember that cafe I told you about? He chuckled. The one with the good biscotti? Yes. I replied, I think I want to rebuild it. He didn't ask if I was sure. He just said, give me the address. Later that week, Marco showed up at my door without warning. He was holding a manila folder and smiling like he had good news. Hey Mom, he said, kissing my cheek. Thought I'd stop by and go over some stuff with you. I poured him coffee while he sat at the table and opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, spreadsheets, and what looked like a draft of a power of attorney form. I've been meaning to talk to you about your finances, he said casually, tapping the pages. You've done great, really, but it might be time to simplify, consolidate some things. Maybe let me help. I stared at the papers, then at him. You think I need help managing my money? Well, he said, clearing his throat, you're getting older, and with your memory. My memory is fine, I said sharply. What you're noticing is distance, not confusion. He looked surprised, maybe even a little hurt, but he didn't argue, just said, think about it. I have, I said, rising from the table. And I think I'm fine on my own. He left shortly after, folder still in hand. eyes scanning the house like he was seeing it for the first time. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled so deeply I felt it in my knees. That night, I found a business licensing site and bookmarked the forms. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because I remembered who I was before I was just Marco's mother. I fell on a Tuesday. It had rained the night before, and the flagstones in my little back garden were still slick with dew. I wasn't rushing, I was just trying to move the potted basil back into the sun. But my heel caught on a loose corner, and down I went, fast, graceless, the way old trees fall in sudden storms. The air left my lungs, like it was angry. My hip took the worst of it, though my elbow caught the edge of the planter and split open on impact. Blood ran down into the grass, a thin ribbon soaking through the sleeve of my cardigan. I remember lying there, stunned, one cheek against the cold stone, thinking, this is how people get found, days later, by neighbors or the mailman. But I wasn't ready to be that story. I tried to sit up. My body screamed, but I did it. Then I reached for my phone. 2 bars of service. I didn't call 911. I called Marco. It rang 4 times before it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I called again. No answer. So I called Anna. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice chipper, like she was mid-conversation. Hi Linda, what's up? I fell, I said, in the garden. I think I need a ride to the clinic. There was a pause. Oh no. Are you okay? Where are you bleeding from? My elbow, and my hip's not great. She sighed, just slightly. Can you maybe call a cab? We're about to head out. Marco's got a meeting, and the twins have soccer. I sat there in the dirt, hand trembling from the chill, and said, it's fine, don't worry. You'll be fine on your own. Right? She said. I hung up before answering. I didn't cry. There wasn't time for that. I dug my fingers into the wet earth, rolled to one side, and used the fence to brace myself. It took 3 tries to stand. My elbow was still bleeding, but slower now. I wiped it with a damp gardening towel and hobbled back into the house. The cab came 15 minutes later. I told the driver I was clumsy and forgot my cane. At the urgent care center, they asked if I had someone with me. I said no. They asked if I'd like someone to be called. I said, no one who would come. They stitched my elbow. Said the hip wasn't broken, just bruised bad. I needed to rest, use a walker for a few days, and avoid stairs. I nodded. They gave me a packet of aftercare instructions, and a plastic bag of extra bandages. The nurse, maybe 25 at most, held the door open for me on the way out. She didn't say anything, but I could tell from her eyes she was trying to place me. Wondering how someone ended up alone like this. The cab dropped me off at home. I made tea, and sat on the couch with a blanket over my knees. Every inch of me ached. But not just from the fall. It was the kind of ache that lives beneath the skin, years old, ignored until it throbs through your bones. I'd been wrong. It wasn't that they forgot me. It was that they no longer saw me as someone worth remembering. That evening, Marco finally texted. Hey, just saw your missed calls. Everything okay? I typed a reply, then deleted it. I set the phone down, picked up the remote, and turned on the oven. Instead, I roasted sweet potatoes. Not because I was hungry, but because I liked the smell. I lit a candle from the drawer, the one Anna gave me 3 Christmases ago, with a tag that said, for when you need a little warmth. She hadn't known how right she was. As I ate at the table, I glanced at the red folder again. Still where I left it. Still holding all the proof that I mattered. At least on paper. Then I looked down at my hands, creased, calloused, stitched. Still working. Still capable. Maybe that's what scared them, that I wasn't soft enough to collapse yet. That I still had too much energy left to be tucked away. I thought of the storefront again, of the dusty chalkboard, of the way the light poured in at an angle that made everything feel golden. And I thought, let them keep their distance. I've got a plan now. Not just survival, something more. The next morning, I left a voicemail for Vittorio. I'm still interested, I said. But I want to meet there. I need to see it again. He called back within the hour. You bring your notebook, he said. I'll bring tape and a flashlight. When I showed up to the storefront that afternoon, he was already inside, sweeping dust into a pile with a push broom and humming softly. The space smelled like time, like wood, rust, old stories waiting to be retold. I stood in the doorway, leaning on my new walker, and smiled. I forgot how big it felt, I said. Vittorio turned. That's because you were looking at it through a dream last time. Now you're here for real. We measured the counter space, checked the wiring, talked about permits and flooring and cost. He told me the plumbing would need work. I told him I could live without a dishwasher for a while. We laughed like old conspirators. When I left, he said, "You sure you want this?" And I said, "I'm more sure of this than I've been of anything in the past 20 years. He tipped his cap. Then let's build it. I walked back to the cab with my elbow still sore, hips still stiff, and my chest a little lighter than it had been in years. No one was coming to save me. But I wasn't broken. I was getting ready. The walker sat in the corner after 2 weeks. I'd graduated to a cane, then to nothing at all by the end of the month. My hips still complained when I bent down too fast or stood too long, but the bruises had faded from violet to yellow, and then to memory. My elbow scar itched on rainy mornings, but it didn't bother me anymore. It reminded me that I got up, that I kept going. I didn't tell Marco I'd recovered. I didn't tell Anna either. They never asked. There's a strange clarity that comes when you stop waiting for people to check in. You begin checking in with yourself. You learn how to ask, what do I need? What do I want? That was new for me, wanting something without guilt. I spent most mornings back at the cafe site. Vittorio's crew moved fast, patching the leaks in the ceiling, sanding down the warped floorboards, rewiring the back room for new appliances. We kept it quiet. I hadn't filed the public paperwork yet, and we worked under a short-term contract, so no one would know unless I told them, which I wouldn't. There was something delicious about the secrecy, like an inside joke I shared only with the building itself. Sometimes I brought pastries for the crew. Not store-bought, mine. My hands remembered how to knead dough before my mind fully woke up. I'd rise at 5:30, mix by feel, bake by intuition. By 8 houring, a warm paper bag of amaretti or lemon knots sat in the passenger seat of my car while I drove downtown. Vittorio said, "You spoil us." I replied, "I'm testing the menu." We both grinned. One morning, after inspecting the new plumbing lines, I sat at the makeshift counter and pulled out an old photo of Dolce Vita. There I was, maybe 43 then, behind the register, flower on my cheek, smile so wide it cut across the years like a thread. The photo was slightly curled at the edges, yellowing at the corners. I laid it on the new counter and said softly, "We're almost back." And I meant it. That afternoon, I stopped by the hardware store to pick out cabinet handles. I told the clerk I was remodeling a kitchen. I didn't mention it was for a cafe. He recommended brushed brass. I picked matte black. He didn't argue. I left with a bag of handles, a receipt, and the first official item tied directly to my new life. It felt heavier than it should have, and more satisfying. Later that evening, I sat at my dining table and made a list. Not of things I needed, of things I deserved. A space of my own, a menu that came from memory, people who saw me, not just what I gave, warm light, real conversation, second chances. I didn't know yet what the cafe would be called. Dolce Vita didn't fit anymore. That was a name born of optimism. This new chapter wasn't about sweetness. It was about depth. Maybe second brew, maybe Nana's table, or maybe I'd wait for the right name to find me. One morning, as the contractors adjusted the glass front door, I saw a shadow pass behind me on the sidewalk. "Linda?" I turned and found myself face to face with an old friend, Lucia Esposito. We hadn't spoken in years, not out of bitterness, but life pulling us in different directions. She had remarried after her husband's death and moved 2 towns over. Her eyes flicked between me and the exposed brick behind the counter. "Is this yours?" "It will be," I said, smiling. She stared at me for a long moment. Then her expression softened. "Good." We sat on the window ledge and caught up. She asked if I'd seen Marco's birthday photos on Facebook. I told her I hadn't logged in for months. She didn't push. Instead, she pulled a folded photo from her purse. It was of her grandson, Luca, standing beside a lemonade stand. "Sometimes I think they need us less," she said. "But maybe they just need us differently." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I agreed. "I think some people just stop needing you once they've finished taking." But I didn't say that aloud. Before she left, Lucia touched my arm. "If you need help with anything, menus, signage, a listening ear. I'm not far. That night, I opened the notebook where I kept cafe plans and added a section titled, People Who See Me. Lucia's name went first. By the third week of construction, we had running water, working light fixtures, and fresh paint on the walls. The smell of plaster still clung to the corners, but it was starting to feel like a place. Not a place to hide. A place to begin again. I brought in a thermos of espresso one morning and shared it with the crew. Vittorio sipped his slowly, eyes scanning the room. This place is going to hum, he said. I hope so. He nodded toward the back wall. You should think about putting something up there. A quote or name. Something that reminds people why you opened. I looked at the bare plaster and imagined words painted in soft gray script. Nothing cheesy, nothing too sweet. Just something true. Maybe. You're never too old to start again, especially when they said you wouldn't. Or maybe nothing at all. Maybe just the smell of coffee, warm pastries, and a woman who found her worth after being told she was fine on her own. It was a Saturday when Marco came back. He didn't call first, just knocked like he used to when he forgot his keys in high school. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd come with an apology, or at least a question that wasn't a disguised request. But when I opened the door and saw the manila envelope in his hand, I knew better. Hi, Mom, he said, with that same rehearsed smile from 2 weeks ago. I stepped aside. Come in. He sat at the table like it was still his, like it hadn't been months since we'd shared a meal, years since we'd shared anything real. The envelope sat between us, untouched, for a full minute. I wanted to follow up, he began, tapping the edge of it. Just to make sure we're on the same page about your accounts. I put together a simplified plan. It'll consolidate everything into a living trust. Easier for you, and easier for the family, when the time comes. When the time comes. He said it like I was already halfway out the door. I sipped my tea, steady as I could, then gestured for him to hand me the papers. Inside were neat printouts, color-coded charts, and 2 signature lines. Mine. His. I flipped through each page slowly. Not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted him to see I was still paying attention, that I hadn't aged out of intelligence. This one here, I said, pointing. It gives you power of attorney. Right, he said, nodding quickly. In case of emergencies, just temporary. We can always amend it later. Does Anna know you're doing this? He blinked. No. Why? I closed the folder, folded my hands, and looked him in the eye. I think you're confusing concern with control. Marco's smile faltered. Mom, I'm just trying to make sure things don't get messy. You've got all these accounts, and you're not exactly telling us what you're doing with your time lately. So now you're curious. I've always cared. No, I said quietly. You've always assumed. He looked like he wanted to push back, but didn't. Just sat there with his hands resting on the folder like it might disappear if he waited long enough. I'm not signing anything today, I said. Or any other day. He leaned back. So you don't trust me now? I trust that you'll do what's convenient. And I trust that I know the difference. For a moment, the room went still. I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the echo of every moment I had ever been invisible to the people I raised. Then, quietly, Marco asked, Is this because we haven't been around much? No, I replied. It's because when I needed help you said nothing, and now that you think I have something you want, you're suddenly involved. He flinched. I stood. My hip barely complained now. You're welcome to stay for coffee, but the paperwork leaves with you. He took the hint, got up, tucked the envelope back into his leather satchel. As he opened the door, he turned and said, You don't have to be alone, Mom. And I said without a trace of bitterness, I'm not. When he left, I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant, either. I felt clean, like something toxic had finally been named out loud. That night, I pulled out the box where I kept my old will. It was still notarized, still legally sound, still naming Marco as my sole beneficiary. I hadn't updated it since 2009, when he was still kind, when he still kissed my cheek in public, when he still called just to hear how my day had gone. I stared at that will like it was a stranger. Then I made a pot of tea, tore it into pieces, and fed each page into the shredder. The sound was louder than I expected, final, mechanical, almost joyful. In the morning, I made a new folder. This one was labeled Cafe, legacy in block letters. I filled it with the business license paperwork, the preliminary budget, and notes on what I wanted the cafe to become. Not just for me, for whoever needed it next. Lucia stopped by again, the next afternoon, this time with a stack of fabric samples. She said she thought I might want help choosing table linens, but I knew she just wanted to sit and talk. We brewed tea in paper cups, sat on upside-down paint buckets in the front of the cafe, and watched people pass by the front window. She asked how Marco was doing. I said he was learning the difference between love and entitlement. She didn't ask more. Instead, she pointed to a soft yellow swatch and said, "This one reminds me of your almond cookies." I smiled. "Then it's the one." Later that evening, as I locked up, I saw something tucked into the doorframe. A card. No envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Anna's." I opened it slowly. "We heard you're fixing up the old cafe. I hope it's not too much for you. Just wanted to say if you need help organizing things, I know people, no hard feelings. Let us know." It wasn't cruelty. It was worse. Dismissiveness, cloaked in politeness. I folded the card and placed it in the trash bin by the sink. Then I turned off the lights and locked the door. Not as an end. As a beginning. The cafe smelled like fresh paint and flour. That morning, I'd tested a new recipe. Hazelnut orange biscotti. The smell clung to my sleeves, my hair, even the curve of my wrist when I poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug I'd kept from the old Dolce Vita days. I stood at the window, watching the light ripple across the floorboards, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something or someone to arrive. I was already here. Vittorio walked in, just before noon, wiping his hands on a paint-streaked rag. "We've got permits," he said, without preamble. "Health, fire, signage, all cleared." I blinked, then smiled. "So I'm official now?" He nodded. "More official than half the cafes on this block." I made espresso. We toasted with mismatched cups. His had a chip in the rim. Mine was still warm, from the drying rack. "I never thought I'd be doing this at 73. I said. "Most people don't," he replied, "because most people forget they still can." That line stayed with me for the rest of the day. In the afternoon, I walked to the market for lemons and rosemary. The cashier, a young man with piercings and purple hair, asked if I was cooking for someone. "For the future," I replied. He gave me a curious look, then said, "I hope it tastes good." Outside, the breeze was sharp. It carried the scent of jasmine and city pavement, and for the first time, I didn't mind the sting in my hip. Pain meant progress. Healing meant movement. And I was moving. When I returned to the cafe, Lucia was already there, setting up a small round table with swatches and chalk samples. "I thought we could decide on the menu board style," she said. "And I brought ribbon samples too, just in case you want to wrap the biscotti bags." I looked at her, gray hair tucked neatly behind one ear, lipstick perfectly applied, eyes sharp as ever, and felt a rush of something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Gratitude. Not because she was helping, but because she wasn't asking what I needed. She just showed up. We worked side by side for 2 hours, testing different chalk colors, debating font styles, drawing crooked borders, and laughing when we smudged them. At one point, she pulled out a thermos and poured me jasmine tea without saying a word. Around 4, she stood and stretched. "What time's your soft opening?" I was thinking, next Friday. She raised an eyebrow. "Are you telling people?" "I'm telling the right people." She gave a knowing smile. "Anyone whose last name starts with R?" I laughed softly. "Only those who remember how to pronounce it, with love." She didn't press. Instead, she patted the counter and said, "This place already feels like home." That evening, I lit a candle on the windowsill. It was a simple act. Something I used to do when Stefano worked late shifts at the garage. A small light in the dark, just in case he needed help finding his way back. This time, I lit it for myself. To remember how far I'd come. How many quiet nights I'd survived. How much I'd built from what others thought was nothing. The biscotti cooled on a wire rack behind me. The cafe sign, temporary for now, was propped in the window. "Coming soon, Nana's table." Lucia had suggested the name. She said, "You've always fed more than stomachs. Let people know where they're sitting." I had cried when I saw it printed. Not loud, not messy, just that kind of cry that passes through you like a warm wave. Brief, but undeniable. At 7:00 p.m., someone knocked on the door. I turned off the stovetop, wiped my hands on a dishcloth, and opened it slowly. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Maybe late 20s, maybe older, wearing a baby carrier on her chest and holding a paper grocery bag. "Hi," she said, eyes uncertain. "I saw the lights. I live across the street. I'm sorry to bother you, but do you maybe have bandages?" I stepped aside without a word and pointed to the first aid kit on the counter. She explained, while she wrapped her hand, "A slip with a knife. A crying baby, panic." I handed her a clean towel. She looked around, eyes wide. "Is this yours?" "It will be. It smells like cookies. It smells like starting over." She smiled, small and tired. "You're lucky." I didn't correct her. I simply said, "I'm ready." She left with a clean bandage and 2 biscotti tucked in her coat pocket, said she'd come back when the doors officially opened. Later that night, I sat alone at the counter with a notebook. I wrote, "I am no longer what they remember. I am what I am becoming." This place is not a revival. It's a declaration. The past no longer needed defending. It had given me everything I needed to rise. The morning of the soft opening, I woke before the sun. No alarm, no noise, just the quiet hush of a body that knew something mattered. I brewed espresso in my old stovetop pot, scorched on the sides, but it still sang the right way when the pressure rose. The kitchen felt smaller that day, not because it shrank, but because my world had grown. For so long, this had been my border stove, sink, table, clock. Now there was more. By 6:30 a.m., I was at the cafe. The key slid into the lock like it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air smelled of lemon oil and flour. I walked the space slowly, checking the counter height, the folding chairs, the little chalkboard sign that read, "Soft opening today. Sit, sip, stay a while." Lucia arrived just after 7, with fresh flowers and a linen apron around her waist. "You look ready," she said. I smirked. "Fake it until the biscotti bake." She laughed and handed me a small wrapped box for the register. Inside was a brass bell, heavy, classic, engraved with a simple vine motif. "So they can thank the chef properly," she said. I swallowed the knot in my throat and nodded. "Thank you, Lucia, for everything." By 8, the ovens were warm, the biscotti lined in neat rows, and the drip coffee was brewing. The first scent of roasted beans filled the air like a hymn. No signs of Marco. No texts, no messages. And that was fine, because that morning, I didn't need anyone to arrive for me. I was there for them. At 8:17 a.m., my first customer walked in. It was the young woman with the baby carrier, the one who had asked for bandages days earlier. Her name was Isabel. She smiled wide, hair unbrushed, eyes exhausted. "You made it," I said. "I promised," she replied. "And I'm early. I hope that's okay." "You're right on time." She ordered an espresso and lemon biscotti. I didn't charge her. She didn't argue. Over the next hour, people trickled in. A man on his bike who worked at the post office, 2 high school teachers grading papers, an elderly couple holding hands who sat at the window and shared a muffin. They didn't know me, but they saw me. And I saw them. Lucia handled the register while I manned the oven. The air filled with the buttery warmth of almond flour and citrus zest. For a moment, I forgot what it felt like to be sidelined, to be spoken over, to be just fine on my own. I was thriving. At one point, I stepped outside to let the steam clear from my glasses. That's when I saw them. Marco, Anna, the twins, across the street, watching. Anna held a paper cup from a chain cafe 3 blocks away. Marco's hands were in his coat pockets. The twins were laughing at something on a phone. They didn't cross over, they didn't wave, just stood there, looking. I met Marco's eyes for half a second before he looked away. Then they turned the corner and disappeared. I stood still for a long time after that. Not sad, just aware. They had seen me, not visited, not congratulated, not entered, but seen. And in a strange way, that was enough. Not because I needed their approval, but because they finally witnessed what they'd left behind. I returned inside to the smell of vanilla and pine. Lucia was pouring a second round of coffee for the elderly couple, now joined by what looked like their granddaughter. Isabel waved on her way out. A little girl wandered up to the counter, peering over the edge. "Do you have anything with chocolate?" she asked. I bent slightly and pointed to the third jar. "Double chocolate shortbread. Want to try?" She nodded, seriously. I wrapped one in parchment and handed it to her. She offered 2 crumpled bills in return. "You're my first real customer today," I said. "Does that mean I win something?" "Yes," I said. "You win the first smile of the day." She beamed, and just like that, the day kept unfolding. By the end of the morning, the bell above the door had rung 27 times. I knew because I counted. Every ring was a new heartbeat, a new chance, a confirmation that I wasn't just surviving, I was creating. Lucia locked the front door at noon, flipped the sign to closed, and gave me a long look. "We did it." "No," I said. "I did it. You helped." She didn't argue. Instead, she handed me a broom and said, "Clean up, chef." That night, I returned home sore and flour-dusted and so full of life it ached. I sat at the table and pulled out my red folder, not the old one, the new one. Inside, a customer log, cash total, leftover recipes, and a note scribbled in my own handwriting. They said I'd be fine on my own. They had no idea how fine would become phenomenal. I closed the folder and set it beside a cup of chamomile tea. Then I went to the front window, lit the same small candle, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to them, to myself. For staying, for standing, for saying, "This is mine," and meaning. By Monday, people were already calling it the biscotti place. Not Nana's table. Not the cafe on Pine Street. Just the biscotti place. And I loved that. It meant they weren't coming for branding. They were coming for comfort, for something made by hands, not machines. For something warm, crisp, a little sweet, and a little stubborn. Lucia came early again, this time with a pair of gardening gloves and a tray of potted herbs. "If you're going to serve rosemary focaccia, you should grow it yourself," she said, placing the tray beside the window. We planted them in long wooden boxes and lined the sills with clay pots. The smell of earth and citrus filled the front of the cafe. People walked by and paused. One woman asked if we were an Italian bakery or a florist. "Both," I told her, "depending on what you need." By Wednesday, someone from the neighborhood association stopped in. A younger woman, maybe mid-30s, wearing a tidy ponytail and blazer, clipboard in hand. "Are you the owner?" she asked. "Yes. We've had a lot of good feedback about this place already," she said. "Would you be open to hosting one of our monthly meetups?" I hesitated for a moment. The thought of 30 strangers with clipboards and committee agendas filled me with a strange nervousness. But then I remembered, this place isn't just for me. "It would be my pleasure," I replied. She smiled. "Great. You'll get new faces, and it'll remind people that this street still has life in it." That night, I penciled it into the notebook. March 11th, Neighborhood Association Meetup. Serve fig tartlets, and just beneath that, "You're not invisible anymore." That weekend, the local newspaper ran a short feature. Nothing dramatic, just 3 paragraphs in the What's New Around Town column. A photo of the cafe's front window with the herb boxes. A line that read, "Nana's Table, a cozy new cafe owned by longtime local Linda R. Opens quietly, but with heart. A place for stories, sugar, and second chapters." They got my age wrong. Said I was 68 instead of 73. I didn't correct it. Let them think I was 5 years younger. I had earned every minute. Business picked up. Not booming, not chaotic, just steady, human. People came, not just for coffee, but for the pause, the quiet, the smell of toasted almonds and lavender sugar. I kept the music low and the lights soft. I let the biscotti speak louder than the espresso machine. And somewhere between Tuesday and Thursday, I realized something important. I was finally the person I used to believe I had to become for someone else. And I was doing it for myself. One morning, I opened the doors early. The sky was still lavender, the air still wet with dew. A man stood at the corner, holding a bouquet of tulips. He looked uncertain. "Are you open yet?" he called. "For tulips? Always," I said. He smiled and came in. Said they were for his mother's birthday. She had passed 2 years ago, but he bought them every March 2nd anyway. It made the day easier, soft. I thought maybe a coffee and a quiet seat might help, he said. I gave him the corner table and a fresh cinnamon twist, no charge. When he left, he took 2 extra biscotti for the walk and whispered, "Thank you." She would have liked it here. Later that week, Lucia and I sat at the counter sorting through thank you notes and recipe requests. Some had been left on napkins. One had been drawn in crayon. "You need a bulletin board?" she said. "For compliments?" "For reminders," she replied, "that this place matters." So we hung one beside the counter and pinned the first note. It read, "You made me remember my grandmother's kitchen, and I didn't know I needed that." Around this time, I received a voicemail from Marco. His voice was neutral, measured, almost businesslike. "Hey Mom, heard about the article. Looks like the cafe's working out. Just wanted to check in. Maybe we can talk sometime. No pressure." I didn't call back. Not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood that not every open door needed to be walked through again. On Friday, Isabel returned. This time, she brought her mother, a woman about my age, with soft curls and hands that looked like they'd cooked thousands of meals. They sat at the table near the rosemary pots and shared a slice of olive oil cake. When they left, Isabel's mother stopped at the counter and said, "Whatever you are building here, don't stop. There are too few places where people feel seen." I smiled and nodded, but inside I was crying. Not with sadness, with affirmation. I had become exactly what I was told I didn't need to be, and it had changed everything. That night, I locked the door slowly, stood in the silence of the cafe. The chairs were stacked. The pastry case was empty, but the room was full of voice, memory, purpose. I turned off the lights, lit the window candle, and whispered, "Let them say whatever they want. I know who I am now." The cafe had been open a full month when Marco returned. He didn't come alone this time. Anna was with him, her coat too crisp for spring, sunglasses pushed into her hair like a crown. They didn't walk in immediately. They stood across the street for a long time, just like the last time, except now they weren't watching. They were calculating. Lucia had just left with a basket of lemon tarts for the library fundraiser. The room was quiet, the espresso machine cooling. I was behind the counter restocking biscotti jars when the bell finally rang. Marco walked in first, Anna close behind, glancing around like she was trying to guess how much everything cost. "Hi, Mom," Marco said. "The place looks cute." "Good morning," I replied, not stopping my work. "Coffee?" "No, thank you," Anna said. "We just wanted to drop by." She handed me a cream-colored envelope. I dried my hands on a cloth and took it. The paper was expensive, embossed. Inside, an invitation. It was for the twins' birthday party. A catered event at a country club. RSVP requested, formal attire. I looked at the date. It was in 2 weeks. "I thought it would be good," Marco said, "for everyone. We know we've been distant, but things can change." I studied him. Older than I remembered, more tired. He hadn't shaved that morning, his stubble a subtle admission of uncertainty. Anna spoke next. "You've made your point," she said, "with the cafe and everything. It's nice, really, but maybe now it's time to reconnect." I placed the invitation on the counter, smoothed it with my fingers. Then I asked, "Why now?" Marco hesitated. "You're doing well. We thought maybe you'd want to be part of things again." "You mean now that you've seen I don't need anything from you?" "That's not fair," Anna snapped. "No," I said quietly. "What wasn't fair was asking me to disappear from your lives and then assuming I'd wait by the phone." Neither of them responded. I gestured toward the corner of the cafe. "That table is open. Sit, if you like." They exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. "We should go," Anna said, already turning toward the door. Marco lingered. "Mom," he said, softer, "it doesn't have to stay like this." "I know," I said, "but it will until you stop showing up, only when it's convenient." He nodded slowly. "You're different now." "I'm honest now," I corrected. Then I added, "And I built something without you. That's not revenge, that's reality." He stepped outside. The bell jingled as the door shut behind him. I stood there for a long time, then I slid the invitation under the counter, beside the receipts and spare napkins, not out of bitterness, but because I had finally learned how to choose myself. The next morning, I arrived early, Sunlight filtered in through the herb boxes. The rosemary had started to bloom, small, purple flowers opening like quiet laughter. I set a single lemon tart on a plate and made one espresso, placing both at the corner table. I sat, not to wait for someone, but to honor that I no longer had to. I opened my red notebook and wrote, "They asked me to come back, but I never left myself." Around 9 a.m., a man I didn't recognize walked in. Older, maybe in his 80s, tall, with a weathered face and careful eyes. He wore a dark vest and carried a folded newspaper. "I heard the biscotti here are better than forgiveness," he said. "They're less complicated," I replied, smiling. He sat, ordered one with almond and a black coffee. I served him quietly, noticing how he arranged the sugar packets in color order. "You run this place?" he asked. "I do. And what made you start over at your age?" I paused, then said, "Because they said I'd be fine on my own, and I wanted to make sure that was true." He nodded thoughtfully. "And is more than fine." He visited every Wednesday after that. His name was Enzo, a retired mechanic who still wore his shop watch, grease stains faint on the leather strap. He didn't ask personal questions, and I didn't offer. But each week, we shared a pastry, a quiet hour, and something even more rare, respect, with no obligation. Lucia teased me, said I'd found a gentleman caller. I just smiled and said, "He's a Wednesday person." That's what I started calling people who showed up without needing to take something from me. Wednesday people. Steady, simple, real. One evening, I stayed late to prep extra dough for a catering order. The lights were dim, the street outside quiet. I turned on the small lamp behind the counter, lit the candle in the window, and rolled the dough slowly, deliberately. That's when I felt it. Not a presence. A peace. The kind that comes when you stop asking for doors to open and realize you've built your own house. And in it, every room belongs to you. Some mornings feel heavier than others. Not because of sadness, but because of weight, realness. The realness of choosing to rise, open the door, light the candle, roll the dough and greet the day like it never betrayed you. I no longer woke hoping someone would call. I woke because my biscotti needed to be turned at 30-75 degrees, and the lemon glaze wouldn't make itself. That's how you heal, I think. In rituals. Not dramatic declarations or grand forgiveness speeches, but in flour-dusted aprons and good espresso. 2 weeks had passed since Marco's visit. The invitation still sat beneath the counter, untouched. Lucia had seen it once and didn't ask. She simply rested her hand over mine and said, "Sometimes a no is the kindest thing we ever say to ourselves." I kept it there not out of indecision, but as a reminder, I could still receive invitations. I just didn't have to accept them. The neighborhood meetup took place the following Friday. I prepared 3 platters, rosemary focaccia, fig tartlets, and miniature chocolate almond biscotti. I arranged them on a repurposed serving cart, polished to a shine by Enzo himself, who insisted, a table should never wobble, especially when it holds something made with care. Lucia came early to set up the extra chairs. We ended up needing more. 32 people squeezed into the space, meant for 20. Someone sat on the herb boxes by the window. A teenager held a cup of espresso like it was holy water. A woman brought her schnauzer and let it nap under the pastry table. The room buzzed, not with noise, but with knowing. People who hadn't spoken in months sat shoulder to shoulder. Someone took notes. Someone else passed around photos of their grandchildren. One woman cried quietly over biscotti and stories of a husband who passed last spring. And in the corner, I watched. Not as a host, but as proof. Proof that healing doesn't just mend, it multiplies. The next day, I got an envelope in the mail, with no return address. Inside, a photo. Me, standing behind the counter during the meetup, a plate of tartlets in hand, mid-laugh. Underneath it, in neat handwriting, "You gave us more than coffee. You gave us a place to remember who we are." I pinned it to the bulletin board beside the crayon drawing. That wall was growing crowded. And I loved it. That Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I closed the cafe. Not for emergency, not for illness, but for peace. Lucia picked me up in her old Fiat, and we drove out past the town center, into the vineyards where the sky stretches low and the hills roll like softened cloth. We didn't speak much. At a certain age, silence becomes its own language, the kind you don't need to translate. We stopped at a small chapel, overlooking a grove of cypress trees. It was Stefano's favorite place. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Lucia waited by the car while I stepped toward the chapel door. The wood was weathered, the stone cool. I sat on the small bench just outside and placed a folded napkin beside me. Inside it, a single piece of olive oil cake. No note, no ceremony, just offering. I looked out across the valley and whispered, I'm okay now. Not perfect, not pain-free, but whole. On the way back into town, we stopped for cherries from a roadside stand. The man working the booth smiled and said, You're the cafe lady, right? My wife says your shortbread made her cry. I smiled. It tends to do that. He winked and tossed in an extra handful. We drove back with the windows down, the scent of cypress and flower in the air. That evening, I opened the cafe just for myself. No guests, no lights on, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the echo of chairs tucked in for the night. I placed the cherries in a bowl, sat by the window, and let the quiet hold me. Not a silence of absence, but of presence, of arrival, because for the first time, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own life. I was home. I opened my notebook and wrote, I was never meant to fade in the background of someone else's story. I was meant to host my own table, and I did. Every single day. It started with a school project. One of the regulars, Elena, a history teacher at the middle school, came in one afternoon and asked if I'd be willing to speak to her students. About what? I asked. About beginnings, she said, and about staying. I raised an eyebrow. Staying? In a world where everyone leaves small towns the second they can, she explained. You stayed, and you built. I told her I'd think about it. She smiled, left her usual almond biscotti on the plate untouched, and said, They'd really listen to you. That night, I sat on the front step of the cafe with Enzo. The sun was setting behind the shops, casting long orange shadows on the street. He drank his usual black coffee. I held a chipped mug of mint tea between both hands. You going to do it? He asked. I don't know, I replied. What do I have to say to 13-year-olds? Probably more than you think, he said. You've lived. That's rare these days. I said yes. Not because I needed to teach, but because I realized maybe I had become something worth passing on. The visit was scheduled for a Wednesday. They walked over from the school 2 blocks away, 24 students, clipboards in hand, half of them yawning and half of them pretending not to be impressed. Lucia and I pushed the tables together, served small butter cookies and lemon water in recycled jam jars. The students sat in folding chairs and looked around the cafe like it was a museum exhibit. I stood by the counter with my apron still on, flour dust on my sleeves. Elena introduced me. Then it was quiet. I took a breath and told them the truth. I told them I was 73. I told them I hadn't always been strong, that I'd believed, once, that my worth depended on who kept me close, that I had waited for permission, for approval, for an invitation, and that, one day, no one sent one. So I sent one to myself. To this place, to this life. I told them I didn't start over with confidence. I started over with coffee and doubt. I built a cafe with cracked tiles, chipped plates, and too many reasons not to try. But I tried anyway. And now people ask how I made it work. And the truth is, I stopped asking to be chosen. I chose myself. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Then a girl with braces raised her hand and asked, Do you regret not doing it sooner? I smiled. Regret's a heavy thing. I try not to carry it. I just walk forward a little lighter now. A boy near the window asked, Did anyone make fun of you? Some did, I said, but they don't come here anymore. You only mock what you don't understand. And now they understand I'm not going anywhere. When they left, several of them lingered. One girl tucked a note under her cup. Later that day, I found it while clearing the table. You made me believe my dreams don't expire. I pinned it to the bulletin board. It made me cry. Not because it was sweet, but because someone had once made me feel that way, and now I was the one returning the favor. The following Sunday, the local paper came again. This time, It wasn't a paragraph. It was a feature. A full-page story titled, From Silence to Strength, How One Woman Reclaimed Her Life, One Biscotti at a Time. They photographed me behind the counter, hands in the dough. The article mentioned my age this time, correctly. It quoted Lucia, Enzo, even Isabel. The twins were mentioned once, briefly, in passing. But the focus was mine. My story. My space. My voice. That afternoon, a steady stream of people came by. Some brought flowers, others brought baked goods to return the favor, they said. One woman brought a single photo of her grandmother rolling dough on a marble slab. She would have liked you, she said. You remind me of her. Same eyes, and I thought, what a legacy, not through blood, through memory. Late that night, when the cafe was empty again, I placed the newspaper in a frame, not to brag, not to display, but to preserve. Because so many parts of my life had disappeared into drawers and forgotten albums, this I would keep visible. Proof that I was here, that I mattered, that I chose to matter. I ended the night with my usual ritual. 1 espresso, 1 biscotti, 1 candle in the window, and a whisper, you did good today. Not they, you. Because the girl they said would be fine on her own? She had become more than fine. She had become formidable. Spring drifted in slowly that year. Not in blooms or fanfare, but in the quiet shedding of coats, the longer hours of sun slipping through the rosemary, and the fresh citrus scent that lingered on every corner of the cafe. The rosemary boxes had overgrown. Lucia joked that we could start a herb shop on the side. I didn't mind. Overgrowth felt like a blessing, not a burden. I let things bloom now, even if it made the place a little messier, even if it took extra tending, even if no one but me. No. Marco came by once more, alone this time. It was early, just after I'd opened. I hadn't even turned on the music yet. He didn't come to apologize, he didn't come to argue, he didn't even order coffee. He stood at the counter, hands in his pockets, and said, I read the article. I nodded, not offering more. He paused, then added, they sent it to me, from 3 different people. Still, I stayed silent. I had no interest in rescuing the moment for him. Marco looked around, took in the herbs, the photographs, the warm scent of orange zest. You did this, he said, not as an accusation, not even as a compliment. Just a fact. I did. I said. He looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. And maybe he didn't. Because I had stopped trying to fit into the version of me he wanted. I think about Dad a lot lately, he said, almost too quietly. I let the silence carry that weight. I wouldn't fill it for him. He looked at the wall behind me, the one with the photo of me in flower-streaked sleeves, the clippings, the handwritten notes. You built something real, he said. I don't know that I ever have. You still can, I said. But don't come here looking for permission. He nodded slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the counter. A photo. The twins, laughing, standing under a tree with their faces lit by spring sun. For you, he said, if you want it. I didn't pick it up, not yet, but I let it stay on the counter. That, in itself, was something. After he left, I stood for a long while looking at the photograph. Then I tucked it beneath the counter, not into a drawer, just set it gently next to the invitation. They didn't deserve my erasure. They simply didn't deserve ownership over my story anymore. That week, I did something no one expected. I added a second name to the cafe sign, below Nana's table, in smaller letters, in memory of Stefano. Lucia saw it first. She touched her chest and whispered, finally. And I said, he believed in the version of me I hadn't yet become. He deserves to stay in the story. I updated the legal papers too. Not out of spite, out of precision. The cafe, the recipes, the apartment, all of it would go not to Marco, not to the twins, but to a trust, to fund grants for women over 60. Starting over, Lucia helped me draft the letter that would announce it someday. Enzo proofread it 3 times, pointing out a stray comma and one line that sounded too sentimental. I want this to be clear, I told him. Not poetic. And so it was. No drama, just truth. A few days later, Isabel brought her daughter in, after school. The little girl now ran straight to the pastry case like it belonged to her. Her fingers tapped against the glass. "The chocolate one," she declared. I handed it over with a napkin and said, "It's got your name on it." She beamed. Isabel stayed behind after her daughter skipped to a table. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "I got the job." "The museum?" She nodded. "You were my reference." I barely said anything. I said, "You said enough," she smiled. "That I show up, I care, I try. Sometimes that's all anyone really needs to hear." That night, I closed early. Not for sadness, for reflection. I pulled out the red notebook and wrote one final page. I was never meant to be forgotten. I was simply waiting for the moment I remembered myself. Then I turned the last page and closed it for good. Some stories don't need sequels. Some lives, once reclaimed, don't require footnotes. They just need to stand, complete and unshakable, like a table that doesn't wobble, like a biscotti baked twice for strength. And so, I stayed. In the cafe, in the town that once passed me by, in the life I had once been told would be just fine. But now, every jar of sugar, every folded napkin, every handwritten note on that wall told a different truth. That fine was never enough. I had become unforgettable.